when I first started in this career several years ago, I used to drive down North Avenue in Baltimore and I would see the people slumped over in the middle of the streets and stuff. And I would just be like, why can't they get a job? Why don't they go home or somewhere private and use these drugs instead of out there on the street? But every one of those people have a story. They have a mother, a father, they have children, sisters and brothers. We don't know what they're going through.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's episode where we will be discussing homelessness and addiction in America. And joining me today, I'm actually going to have a guest. His name is John. I met him on a cruise. Guys, I love cruising. I know there's been a bunch of documentaries out now knocking the cruise industry. I like it. I know it's not the most environmentally friendly, but I do like going on a cruise. What can I say? I'm a cruising kind of guy. All right, putting that to the side, guys. That's where we met. He has a background that he will share with you guys about homelessness and addiction, and expertise in the field. So I'm pretty excited to share that interview with you guys. But before I toss it to that interview, I wanted to share something I'm experimenting with. I'm hoping a few of you, the viewers, can help out. And I want to do a political draft. So what this would look like is in your dream scenario. So putting up politicians as if they were draft picks, kind of like a sporting event, and picking through the leader, the Speaker of the House, Senate, Vice President, and President. So we were going to be picking 4 different positions here, and just kind of drafting the different politicians. So it's something I've been playing around with, but nonetheless, if that seems like something that would be fun, and it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or do not define yourself by any of those 3, any politician or any really public figure is up for grabs, right? Donald Trump was not a politician in its sense before he rose to prominence in the political arena. And we've had other politicians in history who were not really politicians, quote unquote, who ended up being elected to office. So that's something you're interested in joining me on the show to participate in. Please let me know. I think it could be a lot of fun. But with that said, let's throw it to the interview with John. I think you guys are going to absolutely love the discussion we had. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's show where I'm lucky enough to have another guest on today. We have John on to discuss the intersection a little bit between homelessness and addiction and his expertise in those two areas. So, John, how are you? How you doing today, man? I haven't really seen you since we met on the cruise ship. So, how you doing?
Right, definitely. I'm doing good. Just finished a group here at work, so yeah, thanks for having me on your show. Glad to be here.
Yes, of course. And one of the reason I reached out to you is on social media a lot. I've seen your level of passion about what's going on and just care about people. And I think with this podcast, that's just what I'm trying to do is like to get us as average people to just care a little bit more about what's going on. So thank you again for being on. So my first question for you is just to explain a little bit about what you do for, your career, and why, you're a little bit more of an expert, than the average person when it comes to homelessness and addiction.
Right. So, probably after high school, I got into the business world for a while and saw it was so easy to get laid off in the business world. So decided to pursue healthcare because, I struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction in my own personal life. So I really wanted to give back. So I went to school and got a degree in psychology and then got a graduate degree in addiction counseling. And I'm working on a PhD in addiction counseling as well. And so currently, I'm a clinical supervisor for a company that we run treatment centers and we have houses for people that are experiencing homelessness and addiction and trying, to help them get back on their feet and fight this disease that's really prevalent around the world, especially in the United States.
Yeah, so that level of expertise, not only in your job, but in your furthering education. So I love that. I'm excited to have this conversation because I'll be transparent myself. Like, I haven't battled with addiction and I don't really know anyone in my personal life who has, but I'm not ignorant to the fact that it affects a lot of people. And I'm also not ignorant to the fact, like, any of us can be one job laid off away from struggling to find housing. So I'm always trying to keep that full perspective. So, kind of leading to this question, what from you seen in your career, your research, your education, what tends to lead people, or what are the steps that lead people to becoming homeless? I don't know if I asked that. What are the causes of that? And same goes with addiction. What tends to lead to that from your experience?
Right. Well, I love what you said because I tell people that all the time. Even though, right now, I have a car, I have a place to live. I just got a raise. I'm making fairly good money and can pay bills and go on cruises like I met you. But I always tell people I'm just a paycheck away from, being out there on the streets.
Right. And I
We
think
all are.
Yeah, I think to that note, I think it's like 40% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, or it's like an insanely high number. So to your point, like, you just missed that one paycheck. Now we can't pay rent. You miss another paycheck. It can spiral pretty quick. But I just wanted to throw that statistic out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm really big on is stigma. I really concentrate on stigma here where I work with the clients that I work with because I want to be a small part in changing the stigma, especially in the United States. People go into the emergency department seeking help and, they're labeled junkies or addicts, looking for pain medicine when they might have a legitimate crisis. When we see people on the side of the road, asking for money, it's like most people think, well, why can't they get a job? I'm not going to give them money, or they're just seeking money for drugs or alcohol. But that's not always the case. We know sometimes it is, but we don't want to label everybody like that. So I'm really passionate about this. And to your question, um, being homeless can strike anybody. I mean, it can happen from just, you know, a natural disaster, as you know, like a tsunami, fires, earthquakes, somebody losing their job
Yeah, and
can,
to those notes, like, the natural is that, so that's something I didn't even, like, there's so many things that can lead to it. That's something I didn't even think about, but it's like, how could I not think about it considering how many climate disasters we're also seeing, the increased frequency of them, and then also the insurance companies, because they know there's a likelihood of increased natural disasters destroying homes, insurance premiums and things, like, there's this huge thing with that climate component that I don't know. Like, I guess it was dormant in the back of my mind, but it's like, no, that's so obvious and such a good point. So I just wanted to butt into it to
yeah.
mention that.
And a lot of people aren't even prepared. They might not have insurance to protect their homes, especially Tornado Alley or something. I mean, things can happen. Illness can happen. People can have medical bills or develop cancer and not be able to work. And housing is expensive today. I think I was at a wedding yesterday, and somebody told me her kids are one of her children and their family is paying like $3,400 a month just in mortgage. Not to add on, electric, cable. You want to buy groceries and have fun, and diapers are expensive and just all kinds of things. So I mean, it can come from all types of things. Um, you know, People don't wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to be a drug addict or I want to be homeless."
I
It's not that.
thank you for saying that, because, like, I think that goes such a big part towards breaking that stigma you're talking about. It's like, look, no person who's begging for money on the side of the street envision that for their life, right? It's not like, at a young age I was in school and it's like, you know what, that's what I want. No, like, things happen, structural things happen. Maybe there was a so many things, like you mentioned, that lead people to that point. So when people, like, negatively stigmatize it, I'm like, you need to step back and look at the individual story and what happened to lead them to that point.
Yeah, I mean, When I first started in this career several years ago, I used to drive down North Avenue in Baltimore and I would see the people slumped over in the middle of the streets and stuff. And I would just be like, why can't they get a job? Why don't they go home or somewhere private and use these drugs instead of out there on the street? But every one of those people have a story. They have a mother, a father, they have children, sisters and brothers. We don't know what they're going through. And I really have a heart for those people because, they're in a bad place. And it's easy to become homeless. It's easy to not have money. It's easy to become addicted to something, and drugs and alcohol is the first thing we think of, but there's so many other addictions, which I hope we can talk about in our time together, um, and some of the causes of that. So, yeah, homelessness doesn't always go hand in hand with addiction, but a lot of times people they have no other outlet and they're suffering so bad they will turn to something that gives them some kind of relief, something that they can connect and bond with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to actually jump into that addiction piece next because I think you did a great job kind of laying out. And there's probably a dozen other reasons that people could end up homeless that we didn't even mention, right? It's a complicated thing. But in terms of addiction, I think, I tend to, when I think of it, I think of that coping mechanism thing, but there's a lot more to it, I'm sure. And you also mentioned different types of addiction. So can you speak a little bit to that? Like, how does addiction develop generally? What are the different types of addiction you've seen? And just speaking to the addiction component more, separate to the homelessness component.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people think addiction is a choice. They think it's a moral failing. It's people are bad or you can just stop. Why don't you stop doing that? Find Jesus or whatever, They look at it as these people are bad. And that's why I won't say clean or dirty urines. I say people are experiencing homelessness. I don't call them addicts per se. It's someone struggling with a substance use disorder. I'm very big on stigma. So addiction comes from a lot of things going on. We all have genes in our body, and I've learned this in college. There's scientific evidence and papers out there. Anybody could have a gene activated for addiction. A lot of addiction is hereditary. It passes down to genes, but that's not the only thing that happens. One of the big precursors to addiction is something called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. So what happens is a long time ago, these doctors at Kaiser Permanente did this study because they felt children weren't being screened appropriately. And so now there's this survey, but there's more questions than what they ask on the survey. Did you grow up in a family where one of your parents were absent? Did you grow up with domestic violence? Were one of your parents in jail? Were you in an environment where you were hearing gunshots and things? Were you abused physically or sexually or emotionally and stuff? So the more points people get on this adverse childhood experience scale, the more prone they are to addiction. And people say, well, how does that cause addiction? Well, what happens is if you're in the forest and a bear is about to attack you, cortisol is released into your body for the fight or flight. So you can fight that bear or run from that bear. But as a child, over and over again, when you're having cortisol released into the body, it becomes maladaptive. So people that have this overproduction and overstimulation of cortisol going into their body as they're a child, it causes cancer, diabetes, it causes addiction, it causes problems as the person gets older. So it's a chemical thing. And it's proven that um, if you were just told, your child passed away, and they did a PET scan or an imaging of your brain, an area of your brain would light up for emotional pain, for sadness. And then if I was to stab you with a knife, the same area of the brain lights up. And so addiction actually changes the structures in the brain. And it actually hijacks the reward system. The best way I can explain it is I tell people, think about somebody you really, really love. and pretend that, and you would never hurt that person. But if they cover your mouth and nose and you can't breathe, your body's going to kick in and you would kill that person to breathe. And that's what addiction is. You can't breathe. It hijacks the Maslow's hierarchy, the reward system of the brain. So the brain believes it needs drugs, alcohol, gambling, whatever they're addicted to, more than food, shelter, clothing, things like that. So it's an actual disease of the brain. And then obviously we know trauma. Trauma causes this. Um, and it manifests in several ways. People are addicted to several things. It's not always drugs or alcohol, but it gives the same uh, response to the body.
Got it. No, I love that you mentioned the ACEs. That is a huge study. I actually use it in my field as well in education. I'm going to put the link to some information about ACEs below in the description because I think that's a groundbreaking, like really important study that, not obviously just impacts your career, but my career and many careers out there. If you're just working with people in general in a
Yeah.
meaningful way. And another thing I love that you mentioned is like addiction can impact anyone. I think one of the moments for me as when I was in my like 20s that kind of kicked in for me was seeing how often people were getting addicted to painkillers after surgery. And it was just no, like, people who would have been low on the ACE score relatively, right? But
Right.
they had back surgery or something and like it's incredibly painful. And the drugs that are, prescribed to them they work, but they're also incredibly addictive. So I think that's just important for people to realize when they see people on the street or whatever, like that could be you, that could be someone you love. It's not, no one's that far away from that happening. So I'm glad you mentioned that. One quick question: what are some of the other addictions that you have seen out? Drugs and alcohol are kind of the big two. What are some other addictions you've seen or you've worked with?
Right. So definitely. So the difference is there's addictions that you consume something, you put in your mouth. And then there's what they call process addictions. So that would be something a person does that releases activates the reward system, the dopamine, and releases that chemical that gives them pleasure. So gambling is like a big one. Uh, Cell phones, social media is addicting. Going to the gym, believe it or not, people think that sounds wonderful. I'm going to the gym every day. But if you're neglecting your kids and your wife, and taking selfies all day, it could become a problem. I guess first let me really quick define addiction because a lot of people don't understand the difference. Physical dependence to something is not addiction. Addiction is a behavior. So substances and things can be physically dependent and people get addicted to them, but they're really not addictive by themselves. You know, Grandma could go to the hospital and be put on morphine or something for a broken hip, be weaned off of it and never become addicted. But somebody that's prone to it, would become addicted. So,
So there are like
addiction.
there's substances that are like addictive in nature and may have like a I guess like a more physical response, for instance, if you try to wean off them, but the addiction comes from the repetitive use or that it's interfering really with your day to day, with what you're trying to do in life. And you can't break out of needing to do that thing.
Right. Exactly. What addiction is, like I tell people all the time, it's not about the drugs or alcohol. People should be able to, and use. I mean, Maryland is legal marijuana. If you want to use some marijuana, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to have a beer and go to a baseball game, what it is loss of control, compulsion, cravings, and continued use or doing something that causes negative consequences. That's what addiction is. It's a
Got it.
behavioral thing.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you for crystallizing that because for someone like me, even that was like I think that was great and very useful. So kind of switching to like the political aspect, although everything we've really discussed is political, I think every decision that's made in this country, what I'm also trying to get people to understand, like you have to engage with politics because the decisions do impact you. Whether you know it or not. And if they're not impacting you, I would argue they are, but they're impacting people you care and love about directly. Like, so that's a big part of this. But Policy wise, what are some policies either at the local level or at the federal level that you think are contributing or at the least, not helping with either the problem of homelessness or the problem of addiction?
Well, currently, I mean, this is another fact that, and I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but I attend a lot of conferences, and one of the conferences I just recently attended was on gambling. So in the state of Maryland, we have the Center of Excellence for Problem Gambling, which is through the Department of Health and stuff, completely funded. So anybody in the state of Maryland can get gambling addiction assistance and does not need to use Medicaid or their private health insurance. It is completely funded. But on the reverse, you have to pay money or have health insurance or be on Medicaid to get treatment for addiction, which is mind boggling to me. But it's because the state of Maryland is taking in billions of dollars per month on casinos, scratch offs, sports betting, and stuff, which is an addiction, but it's more widely accepted
It's
because
also it's a more like, I guess you can argue in some way with our healthcare system in the United States, treating other addictions is for profit too. But gambling is like so clearly like capitalistic in nature that I would say that's probably why that fund was set up, right? Like, I want you to maybe get treated, but I want you to still continue with the gambling. I don't, yeah.
yes, absolutely. So with addiction, I mean, right now with the current administration, you know, again, in full disclosure, I'm more liberal,
Mm.
democratic. I'm not very happy with Trump, if I can say that. He's a scary
Thank
person.
you. Thank you for keeping it PG because I know that's not what you wanted to say, actually. So
Yeah, yeah. But, by him cutting a lot of these programs, especially cutting funding for like suicide lines, it's heartbreaking. The LGBT population, he's almost being racist or if you're not an old rich white person, you don't matter to his population. He wants to cut everything. So by cutting Medicaid and cutting funding for a lot of these programs that help people, it's going to affect and hurt a lot of people. If you cut funding for mental health, you're going to have people walking the streets that are ill and sick. You're going to have more addicts out there struggling, more people experiencing homelessness. Now, I'm not going to say Trump is fully bad. I think there was a lot of overspending in government and a lot of people. You do it. There's that fine line. There is a lot of people that abuse the system. I will say that, but for the people that don't, we don't want to hurt them. These Medicaid and, SNAP or EBT, food stamps, a lot of these programs, social welfare programs, are to help people get back on their feet so they can be a productive member of society and get help. So, yeah, I remember as a kid, I think my parents got food stamps at one point.
no, and
Um,
to that point, like there are elected representatives in Congress who got there because they had access to programs like this. And I want to also go back, like we mentioned before, no one wanted to, their life goal isn't to be on the street. No one's life goal is to also be on food stamps. Like you said, it's to get off your feet. No one's sitting there and being like, this is my lifelong plan to get like the extra $60 a day or whatever, 120, it depends. But like that is no one's life goal. But the way it's stigmatized is like people are just sitting at home at the couch and like, oh, I've reached my goal in life. I get this, money that I can only buy certain food with that's generally not even health. Like it's just the way it's stigmatized once again. And I'm glad you're fighting against it is so frustrating to me.
yeah. It's definitely an epidemic right now.
And if it's another thing I like to point out to people is if it's so widespread. So with homelessness, we're nearing like 1 million people in the United States. I think I last was like 780,000 is what I saw. Like that is not individual people making poor decisions. Like if it was 100 people or a few thousand, you can maybe argue that. But when you're nearing a million, that is also a societal structural failure and not like an individual failure, in my opinion. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely not. Sorry, what I was thinking about here, what I really wanted to speak about was why To me, America is failing with this so-called war on drugs or war on addiction. We know back in the Reagan era, just say no didn't work. They thought it was you could just say no to these things. You can't say no. It is a disease that needs to be treated. Um, and the problem is in America, I think the government or certain industries keep this going because I don't know if you're familiar with Portugal. Portugal decided, what was going on there wasn't working for addiction. It was let's keep throwing people in jail, and that doesn't work. Criminalizing and putting people behind bars for a disease doesn't help. They don't put people that are going through diabetes that have a couple extra donuts in jail.
Right.
So, and
Particularly in the United States, where we're not focused on rehabilitation at all in our criminal justice system, which is why we have such high recidivism rates. So, not only obviously is it a disease, and you shouldn't be sending someone to like a penal type institution for that, right? But then also, we don't treat it even when they do go there. So you have the two-prong issue there.
So in Portugal, they legalized all drugs. And what they do now, they take all that money that they used in the criminal justice system and they help people. They go to employers and say, we'll pay half this person's salary if you employ them. And they provide them treatment, talk therapy. They use medicines that help with addiction. And, because people have something to wake up for, because connection is the opposite of addiction. If you have something to wake up for and know people care and you're leading a productive life, you don't need drugs and alcohol. You don't need these things because you know, I always say you don't ask people what's wrong with the addiction, you ask what's right with it. When you use, what does it give you? Like when I used, it took away my loneliness. I bonded with the drug. So I need to figure out how not to be lonely to get rid of that addiction. And a lot of people, also criticize medication like methadone, buprenorphine. These are life-saving medications that help people that are physically dependent to be well enough to participate in recovery. But in America they want to keep people on these drugs, and they don't want them necessarily to get well because they're making so much money. And it's the prisons are becoming for profit, so it's easy to throw people into prison for drugs. So it's just this vicious cycle that keeps going.
Yeah, and it seems kind of to, add to that point. It just seems to be like we're anti-research and anti-science. Like you mentioned the suicide hotlines being cut, even though they researched how effective they were, how many calls they had, how you need specific type of individuals dealing with different populations, and that increases the likelihood of suicide prevention. And like we're just not paying attention to the data, or they'll just say the data is not true, and that's like really frustrating as we actually have scientific research, ways to combat issues, and our government is just completely like thrown in the towel with solving any issues, it seems like. So that kind of leads to the next point here. What policies, realistic, and you can throw maybe some, pie in the sky policies, but in general, things that you think can be done, maybe not under this administration, but maybe in the next, 5 years or so. What policies do you want to see enacted that you think would help lower our homeless population and help people battle with addiction so that hopefully less Americans are battling with that, in the future?
Right, absolutely. And I know it's not an easy fix. I don't have the fix. But I think, working on the stigma in the country, you know, and then just driving through Baltimore and cities, you see all these abandoned houses. And, I was watching TV and there was this beautiful, like old abandoned mental hospital. The structure was there. I mean, it could have probably housed thousands of people. I think maybe restoring some of these things, using some of this money where we make bombs and tanks to destroy people, building up, we have so much money. It's sad to think anyone in the world goes hungry or lives in poverty with so much money. Um, and I don't think we should give everything away for free. I think people need to work, but you can even have some of these people experiencing homelessness, like Habitat for Humanity, help build their home and then, help them with job placement skills, how to do an interview, you know. I think Maryland was giving out tablets and things at one time or laptops and the free cell phones. And a lot of people, sadly use them for inappropriate reasons, but it's meant to help people get on their feet and be able to find a job and stuff. So, I mean, I know it's not going to happen overnight, but I just think trying to help people, there's so many jobs out there, but when you're living in homelessness and your body hygiene's not great and you're in clothes that are dirty and stuff, it is hard to get a job. It's not that these people just want to be lazy. It's a proud feeling to get a job.
Right. No,
So,
I like that you finished with that. Like, and I think that should drive everything is the idea like these people aren't just trying to be lazy. That's not like, I know that's what's depicted a lot in like right wing spaces, but that's not the reality. Like, we know housing, you mentioned earlier, like rent, mortgage is out of control. If you have a family, you mentioned diapers, formula, childcare is out of control. We do not have universal health care in this country. So if something happens and you have a medical bill, people file bankruptcy daily in this country because of medical debt. So I'm always like, address any of these issues. You can even do free lunch in school because that would alleviate parents who are struggling financially or who are homeless from having to feed their kids. They'll at least know their kids get like breakfast and lunch a day. There are so many different things I feel like we could do, but we don't do any of them. And like you said, it's complicated. I'm not saying, oh, we have a universal free lunch program and now no one's homeless. No, that's ridiculous, right? But any little investment in a social safety net program to help get people back on their feet is really what we need. And I really hate the stigmatization too of those social safety net programs, welfare queens, stuff like nonsense like that, when it's really like we just live in a really difficult society and sometimes people just need a little help to, get things going.
and I really believe people that work hard all their life and make billions of dollars, it's their money. They deserve to spend it, obviously. But I mean, buying, $400 billion 747s and new helicopters for Marine One, maybe it is
Yeah.
time. But these $200,000 golf trips and dinners and gold ashtrays and stuff,
Yeah.
some of it's just a little ridiculous. It's
Right.
like,
Like
how
they're
much money does one person need,
yeah, no, I
you
think
know,
the
when
White
there's
House
hungry people?
yeah, the White House just announced, I think they're building like a $200 million new
Oh, I
ballroom. And it's
saw
like,
that.
what do we do? Like, what are we doing? Like that's something you do if like every other problem in society is handled. And you're like, you know what? We have a little extra money to splurge, but we are nowhere near good enough to do that. Even in like Baltimore alone, right? I don't know if you know this, but they're doing these huge expansions to Camden Yards, the baseball stadium. And it's like, I think it's $800 million or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
like, I would argue, and I'm a huge sports fan, I'm a huge Orioles fan, but I understand that money should probably be spent on schools or, home. Like there's so many things that are more important
I
than
mean,
our,
schools don't even have air
yes.
conditioners
Yeah.
still, and
Some of
it's
the best schools too.
2025,
Yeah. Yep.
you know?
Yeah. So, I'm with you there. All right. So we're going to wrap up here. Thank you so much. Like, I feel like you provided, I know, a ton of insight for me. I know that's going to seep through the screen wherever people are watching, whether it's, smaller, their phone or big on the
Yeah.
TV. Thank you so much for taking the time. I definitely learned a lot. So this last part is a fun little segment. It does not have to deal with addiction or homelessness. But my question for you is, if you had a magic wand and could wave it and have one policy change in the United States, what would that be? Difficult question.
It is a difficult question. A policy change.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think maybe it is time to change the electoral college, you know. Um,
To a
this
to a
whole,
pure popular vote.
yeah, I probably, I don't know. I'm not a political science major, but I see what the Trump administration's doing, this gerrymandering and trying to redistrict things. They're trying to set it up so that, the
I'm at
Republicans can keep,
Yeah,
you
I'm
know,
actually going to be doing an episode. It's because we're record a little behind the scenes here, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you watching, I'm recording this and then I edit it. It comes out later, so I'm actually going to be doing a gerrymandering episode before this one comes out. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of just the popular vote. I think also on the presidential level, because what it does, for instance, we're in Maryland. I also vote blue, but it feels pointless because it's going to go blue anyway. You get like it,
right.
or when I lived in Tulsa, I voted blue, but it didn't matter. So whereas if it's the popular vote, your individual vote in that total vote count is directly there. And also, like, it's weird to me the Republicans have only won the popular vote twice in my lifetime, but they've been president basically flip-flopping with that that shows the system's broken. That doesn't make sense, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just one last thing. I
Yeah.
mean, if you watch interviews on television, and there are educated and smart people that have voted for Trump, but I mean, most of the people they interview are clueless. They're uneducated, and they're voting based on them being racist. I think because they're scared. Well, the main thing is Trump's not going to let the Mexicans in or something. That's what I hear, and that's why we voted for him.
Yeah,
So.
I'm a big proponent. I've actually talked a lot of this with my family. Is like we need to get people educated about what they're voting for because it is very frustrating to me already. We're not even a year in, and he's not doing to me, he's not doing things that I couldn't have predicted. And I am not this, I don't do politics for a career. It's just if you follow this guy, it's evident. And now people are kind of his approval rating is already in the low 40s and we just started. And it's like, guys, yes, this is what was going to happen. So I am huge on that education component. And really in 2025, when you can just Google things and get it immediately, it adds a little bit more frustration to it. So I'm there with you, but we're gonna get through this. We're gonna work through this, and hopefully we come out the other side with a more progressive type candidate who is going to focus on the average American. That's what I hope. That's what I hope.
And I know you mentioned homelessness, and it just made me think of one last thing. And I know we got to wrap up, but I could talk about these topics forever. Him firing and terminating all these people. I think somebody gave out job numbers he didn't like, and now he wants to fire that lady who's appointed for 4 years. I mean, if she hasn't been saving her money, I mean, she could be homeless.
Yep. No, that
It's sad.
happened to a bunch of federal employees, and what they did with that too is they made the federal employees kind of look like they categorize them as like politicians and bureaucrats that we hate. When guys, those are just every average day people going to like, they're not these bureaucratic people you think they are. They're people like me and you just trying to go to work,
Going
trying to
to their
get
nine
by.
to five,
Yeah, that's what it
sitting at a
was.
computer doing whatever. Yeah, and
Yeah,
now they're
yeah.
doing their job.
Exactly. But thank you for being on once again. I think you had incredible insight. I really appreciate you taking the time. And maybe this won't be the last time you're on.
No, I would love to talk more. There's so much about addiction.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. This
Thanks
is
for having
John,
me.
ladies and gentlemen. I will put, if it's okay with you, John, I'm gonna put your contact, maybe Instagram or something also below on the description in case anyone wants to reach out to you.
Sure, sure,
Perfect.
absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
I hope you guys really enjoyed that interview from the perspective of not someone who's only working in the field and has, degrees in the field, but also someone who's actually battled with addiction. I thought it was very insightful, very helpful in terms of keeping that perspective of looking at each person as having their own story. And just guys, there can be multiple causes as to why someone could be addicted or homeless. And many of us, or all of us really, are, just a moment away of potentially following falling into either of those two categories. So just something to keep in mind as we try to address those problems in the United States. Now, transitioning to our feel-good story of the week, or our shout-out of the week, as I call it, I want to shout out a piece of good news in general. So it's not an individual person, but it's the report of the U.S. murder rate in 2024. So the FBI reports, the figures are suggesting that the U.S. murder rate saw its sharpest ever decline last year in 2024, dropping by 15%, which followed up a decline in 2023 of 10%. So, guys, in general, crime has been declining for quite some time now, but there was an uptick during the pandemic, which makes sense. In general, in times of turmoil and stress, crime goes up. But in general, other than that uptick, crime has been going down, and it seems like that trend is continuing. Overall, violent crime in 2024 was down by 4.4%, according to these reports from the FBI, keep in mind. And this is reaching levels not seen since the 1960s. So this is, guys, significant reports. This is positive. This is showing trends in the correct direction. The hope is that this continues. So I'm just going to leave it at that with that piece of great news there, despite what maybe our president is saying about crime being out of control. I'm going to finish up with our song, our vibes here. I'm going to go with a little Marvin Gaye here and Tammy Terrell, You're All I Need. Thank you for watching and being part of a growing progressive community. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have the time, check out some of my other episodes you can see around me. Thank you.